Hello everyone, it's Martha Novak. I'm so glad to be speaking with you today. We're going to talk about high conflict personalities, and this is the radio show called Real Talk with Martha Novak. I'm awfully glad you're joining us. I think this is an important topic today. I actually did a whole series in my advanced class on this. I'm going to give you the highlights on this radio show. I don't know whether it's going to blend over into another show or not. I never know till we start. However, I do want to say we're taking a lot of this information from a man named Bill Eddy, who wrote a book, which I think is very good, but it's a sensational title. It's called 5 Types of People Who Can Ruin Your Life. Bill Eddy, E-D-D-Y. I want to say he's the co-founder and president of the High Conflict Institute. He's a certified family law specialist and senior family mediator at the National Conflict Resolution Center in San Diego. He's a licensed clinical social worker, part-time faculty at Pepperdine University School of Law. I thought his background sounded fascinating. That was one of the reasons that I picked up this book. I thought, wow, some of the best lawyers are some of the best psychologists I know. So let's see what this book has to say. And I actually think it had some very interesting things to say. So I'm going to pass those high points on to you. Let's do a prayer to get us all on the same page. And then we launch off, okay? Dear God, who is all there is, you who are all we are and all everything is in this world, we thank you so much for our being together this morning and for our starting the show on high conflict personalities. We ask that you show us what you would have us see, hear, sense, and know, that we can incorporate it into our own lives immediately. Let us know that we're all safe in you. And we appreciate the opportunity of being together, and thank you for this whole experience. We now ask that we know nothing, for it is the you through us and through all things that know everything. So we're going to open ourselves right now and have you speak to us through my voice and through the voice of other people. We thank you so much, and so it is. Okay, kids, let's begin. I'm going to jump around into all sorts of things. As usual, we can't start a subject where the subject seems to start in words. It just isn't possible sometimes. Mr. Eddy, or Dr. Eddy, I don't know, I guess he is a doctor, I don't know. But anyway, Bill Eddy, describes 5 personality disorders. I happen to think that disorders are more ordered than normalcy. So I don't like calling them disorders as much as I like calling them defenses. To me, they're defenses of the psyche. Now, I'm not a psychologist. I am an energy worker, so you're going to hear a lot of differences once in a while, and I'll try to point those out as we go through. Personality disorder. Let's talk about what that is to begin with. There are 3 general characteristics of personality disorders, and these characteristics are interpersonal dysfunctions, repeated problems in relationships, for example, attacking others, withdrawing and isolating from others, even wanting to exact revenge or expressing extreme anger. The second characteristic, now we're just in the general realm right now, is a lack of social awareness. This person is oblivious to how they create many of their own problems with other people. They can't see their part of the problem, or how they are creating a lot of the problems themselves, what their contributing factors are. And number 3, there is a noticeable lack of change in personalities like this. The person rarely changes what they do, no matter how much trouble it causes others or themselves. They sabotage themselves a lot. They're stuck. Instead of realizing that and doing something about it, they'll defend their actions. They'll get angry at the person who suggests change. I do want to say that that is true of a lot of people. The people that I tend to work with, the people that come to me, do change. It's a process. It is not going to be quick, but a lot of people with the kind of energy work that I do eventually become aware that there is something beyond, and they end up wanting that. And there are so many ways we approach this from every angle on the planet, but the bottom line is they see what they're doing, and they take responsibility for it. Important. And they have the intention of change, and as more and more awareness dawns, and as they put more things in place at a higher level in themselves, they let go of some of these old ways of doing things. And these personality defenses, disorders, do indeed unravel. Now, I wanted to just put that on the table before we launch into some of this. This show today is going to certainly define the 5 types of people that Bill Eddy talks about that are high conflict individuals. But I'm much more interested in how to get around these people than I am in teaching you about psychology in this show. The advanced people that I work with in my classes that I've been working with anywhere from 14 to 18 years, these people have heard, well, thank you so much. Oh, hello, Kat. I'm so glad that you're with us today. These people in my advanced class have heard years of my teaching. They absolutely know where I'm coming from. They know the intricacies of some of these personality defenses that we're talking about right now. Sometimes they have had some of these of their own. It's too much for me to educate you in any kind of aspect like that, except in my classes. It's rather inappropriate on the radio like this. So I'm going to define these things for you, these 5 types, according to Bill Eddy, and his book, 5 Types of People Who Can Ruin Your Life. I think that's a real dramatic title. I think indeed some of these people can ruin your life, but we're often ruining our own. And I think there's a way to negotiate through almost everything, even if it is leaving. Okay, so we are going to today talk about these 5 types briefly. We're going to talk about the patterns they exhibit that you watch out for, but I'm really more interested in having you be aware of who you're talking to. So I want to give you some personality awareness, and then we're going to talk about, after that, how to deal with this personality if indeed you have to interact with them. One of my clients' bosses, actually 2 of my clients, one of my clients has 2 bosses, and both of them are high conflict personalities. She says this has been quite invaluable in her dealing with that. I have another client whose daughter is high conflict personality. I have another client who married one of these people. And by the way, is still married. It's very important you learn how you learn what's going on. with the tools, when you learn what's going on, you can deal with most everything. And that's what the show is about today. Glad you're watching. All right. So let's talk about the 5 types that actually, you know what? I don't think I want to start there. We'll talk about that in just a second. But I want to go and see if there's something else that yes. I want to talk about something else first. I want to talk about high conflict people in general before I get to the types. High conflict personalities have a narrower pattern of thinking and feeling and behavior than a normal person. This means that they act the same way over and over and over again. Now, this is according to Eddie, but I think he's right. I wouldn't be teaching this if I didn't think he was right about a lot of this. When I pick up these books, and this wasn't true of Bill Eddy, I think that much of this book is wonderful, but when I pick up books and then I share them with you, I am leaving out the parts that I don't agree with, and there's sometimes parts I don't agree with. That is not true here. I think he's absolutely right on about a lot of this. So this means, as I am repeating, that a lot of high conflict people act the same way over and over and over again, and it's different from the person that is not high conflict. Their high conflict pattern makes them more predictable than the average person, and it makes them more easy to identify, which is what I want you to do. One of the most important things to recognize about high conflict individuals is they do not work because they do not know how to work, but they do not work to reduce or resolve conflicts. In other words, they cannot work through problems. One of the things I want to put on the table is they've never learned how to do that. Many times we don't have the parenting that teaches us to work through problems. They don't know how to work through problems, our parents. So they don't pass on to us, here's how you do it. It's a marvelous parent that does teach us things like that. Therefore, there's a great deal of the world that doesn't know how to work through problems. They react the same way they did when they were children. I do want you to know that now, as the adult, if you recognize this is you, that you don't know how to work through problems, find somebody like me, either me, my team, there are other people out there in the world, a good psychologist, minister, counselor, energy worker, something, because you got to learn how to do it as an adult. You just missed that age-appropriate training when you were young. That doesn't mean it's not out there. That doesn't mean anything is wrong with you. It means you didn't learn it, and now you must. You see? I think our adulthood, if we're self-aware people, is often filled with, well, I missed that training when I was young. I've got to go back and learn how to do it now. Care for ourselves, love ourselves, work through problems with other people, resolve them. Okay. So not only do high conflict people not know how to work through problems, but their pattern of behavior increases conflict rather than manages it, reduces it, or resolves it. You get it? Their way of being increases the conflict. Important. Sometimes this involves a sudden, intense escalation of conflict, screaming, argument, running away, violence, all of the things that this could relate to. And sometimes it involves nothing more than dragging out a conflict over months and months and months and pulling a lot of people into it that shouldn't be there at all. Now, it's essential to understand with high conflict people that the issue that seems to be the cause of the conflict is not the actual cause. Extremely important. Put big old lights around that. It's not what they're complaining about. The issue is not the issue, Eddie says. I actually love that statement. The issue is not the issue. With high conflict personalities, the fact that they are a high conflict personality is the real issue. Do you understand? They need conflict. It's really important. I have a theory about this beyond what Bill Eddy said. Here's my theory. You know, I've noticed with OCD people for years that there's a buildup of anxiety. They may be anxious while they're clean. They have a momentary reduction of anxiety after they've cleaned up or after they've turned off the stove 25 times. There's a lessening of anxiety. It's the way they've soothed themselves. That's why it's awfully hard to break, because there's a soothing quality that they are not experiencing generally in life on the day-to-day. So you have to go to these rituals to help them handle the anxiety. I think that many of these high conflict personalities are the same. I think there's a lot of anxiety that builds up without conflict. And I think they are playing out the conflict to handle their anxiety. Now, that's just my theory. And I think there is a lessening of anxiety once they cause this horrible conflict in them. And then it starts over again. They're seeking the next level of conflict. There are 4 characteristics that Eddy associates, and I think he's absolutely right, with high conflict behaviors. I hope you're writing some of this down, because I think it's good stuff. But the show will be archived. Now, keep in mind that if I lose Blog Talk Radio, I think I lost it mid-feed last time, or if I lose Facebook Live, you can always go to the other site and get the whole thing. And the show will be posted, as it always is, on YouTube after the actual event that we're having right now. Okay, let's talk about the 4 primary characteristics of high conflict patterns of behavior. Number 1, all or nothing thinking. You need to listen to what they're saying. All or nothing thinking. I have some friends that are high conflict, and I certainly see them in my practice. They're high conflict people, and they absolutely think very rigidly in all or nothing. And what I mean by that is they'll make a statement. My husband always do that. He's the likable one. He's always the one. Okay? He has never, ever listened to me. Never. Always. Never. Never, ever. That's all or nothing thinking. Where's the middle ground of reality? The fact is, these high conflict people really have not learned that reality can be a friend. They've been hurt. They've been scared. And or their parents have, and they're just emulating their parents. And all of a sudden you go, well, no, there's a middle ground here. There's a ground where our feet are grounded indeed, and we are okay, and we know what to do. That's not the high conflict personality. The high conflict personality is doing extreme things to handle their anxiety about being right here, right now. So all or nothing thinking is one of the things they do. The second characteristic is intense, unmanaged emotions. Intense or unmanaged emotions. Look, we all have some of the personality types that I'm going to be mentioning to you. I think, in my opinion, And it's interesting because I'm beginning to hear that psychiatry is coming around to something I believe for 40 years, and that is that we all are everything. We're all bipolar to more or less degrees. We're all schizophrenic to more or less degrees. We're all everything to more or less degrees. We have characteristics for everything. The thing that is defined in the DSM are the extreme versions of these things, the pathological versions of these things. Hello, Randy. I'm so glad that you've tuned in today. That's delightful. I'm thrilled. So the DSM defines these pathological things when they get very extreme, but I think we all have them, quite frankly. So I don't think there's anything for us to be ashamed of or upset about. So when we're talking about intense, unmanaged emotions, I think years ago I was one of these people, not necessarily high conflict, but I certainly had a lot of histrionic. After all, I was trained to act, right? There's acting and there's acting, ladies and gentlemen, I'll tell you that now. And the best acting in the world, we were just talking about it yesterday in my classes, the best acting in the world is real. You're bringing it up, the real experience. It's not pretend. It's not trying too hard, you know? Okay. You hear me talking about that in other shows. Intense, unmanaged emotions. One of the big lessons for me was a dog I had. And when I got upset, this dog was a seizure dog. It would go into seizures. I learned real carefully to manage emotions and to not only deal with these extreme emotions, not suppress them, by the way. That's not what I'm talking about. But to see them in a context, to realize why I had them, and then all of that kind of goes away. You transcend that state when you're in this consciousness work. You still have the ability to yell at someone about your computer breaking down, but or shoddy service or whatever triggers you. But it goes away. You don't hold on to it. Life's just not worth it. In high conflict individuals, however, there is intense, unmanaged emotion. So that's the second characteristic. Third characteristic is extreme behavior or threats. Extreme behavior or threats. I remember a woman telling me about her husband who, when she came, they had an argument, and when she came home, he had cut all of her pictures out of every picture in the house and put them back on the wall. She was just not in any of them anymore. I remember another time hearing about an argument, and the woman, I think it was the woman? Yes. Dragged her husband's clothes out and burned them in a pile in the yard. All right. Extreme behavior or threats. I remember another time a woman that I heard about had a disagreement with neighbors. I didn't know I'd be telling you these stories. They were shooting off fireworks in their yard at the 4th of July, and her dog was afraid. And instead of going over and talking to them about it, she took her gun and threatened them. Guys, that's not normal. Now, we're going to show you how to spot normal, but take my word for it right now. No. That isn't in the range of normal. There is a range of normal behaviors. Okay. The fourth characteristic is a preoccupation with blaming others. A preoccupation with blaming others. And these people often have, not all the time, but often have a target of blame. Many times it's the person in the house with them. That person becomes their target of blame. Okay? Now, I'd like to talk about each of these things because these characteristics are extremely important, and I want to talk about them in a little more detail. I want to talk about all or nothing thinking. High conflict personalities tend to see conflicts in terms of one simple solution. And the one simple solution is that you get to, if I'm the high conflict person, you must do what I want. The high conflict person sees everything in terms of one simple solution, that you do it. All right. They cannot, and they certainly won't, analyze the situation, hear different points of view, consider several possible solutions. Compromise and flexibility are pretty much impossible for them. High conflict personalities often feel that they could not survive. This is a survival thing now. If things don't go exactly their way, and if things don't go exactly their way, they predict extreme outcomes, catastrophize, death, disaster, destruction. If others don't handle things or respond the same way they want them to. If a friend disagrees with a high conflict personality on a minor issue, a high conflict personality may end the friendship on the spot. That's a clear all or nothing response. Do you understand? I had a client that was very much a high conflict person. And he used to sail, and he is very meticulous, very precise now. Wants you to do everything his way. And well, that just doesn't go down real well with me. So when I did it a little differently, made the cup of tea differently, or whatever I was going to do, he immediately launched into some criticism, this dear client, and told me that he had sailed across the pond, and you can't have that kind of thing on a sailboat. You have to do exactly what the captain says. You have to do it precisely, or you would die. And my only thought is, my darling, you are not still on the ocean blue. This life requires us to be more flexible now. That's all or nothing thinking. Now, let's go to intense unmanaged emotions. The high conflict person tends to become very emotional about their points of view. They often catch everyone else by surprise by their sudden intense fear or sadness, yelling, or disrespect. Their responses can be quite out of proportion to whatever is happening. And they often seem unable to control their own emotions. The interesting thing is there are some of these people, the high conflict types, that will regret afterwards their outburst. But some are actually going to defend it as totally appropriate and demand that you feel the same way. We're going to talk about that more. I think of one example where a woman called her husband on the control he tries to exert all the time. And his only response is not, "I'm sorry I did it again." His response is, "But you need controlling." High conflict response. High conflict people that have these intense emotions become preoccupied with defending their past action and criticizing those of others. They may look very rational when they do so, by the way. But the subject matter will all be about the past, and it will focus on how unfairly they were treated by others and how they're a victim in life. Now, are they going to use that word? Probably not. But you listen for what they're actually saying, okay? Let's talk about extreme behavior or threats. They often engage in extreme negative behaviors. Many of these extreme behaviors are caused by their losing control over their emotions, such as suddenly throwing something or saying abusive words to people that they say they love and care about the most. Other behaviors are driven by an intense desire to control or dominate the people that are closest to them. Oftentimes, these people are afraid of being hurt, and that drives that behavior. Sometimes there is an enjoyment of control and domination. There are also some high conflict people who use emotional manipulation to hurt others, but can appear very emotional and even emotionally in control when they're doing so. Their behavior can trigger anger, fear, distress, confusion in ways that are not even obvious. They may seem very calm and collected, but their emotional manipulations push people away from them, and actually they are working against them. They wonder why they're lonely and that they're not getting what they want, because people gradually wake up to many of these high conflict personalities and move away from them. They are often clueless about how their behavior has caused a really devastating and exhausting effect. Now let's go to number 4, a preoccupation with blaming others. The single most common and most obvious high conflict personality characteristic is how frequently and intensely they blame other people, especially people close to them, or people that have are in a position of authority over them. These are the two categories that are most often criticized. The high conflict person attacks, blames, finds fault with everything their target of blame does. At the same time, high conflict personalities see themselves as blameless and free of all responsibility for the problem. They tend to angrily blame people, both strangers and the people they know. And a lot of times, this blame takes on ridiculous proportions. People that aren't even home get blamed. We were talking the other day in my class. There was an example that someone, let's see what happened. This isn't the case, but someone goes to the refrigerator and the milk drops out of the refrigerator. I'm just making this up because it came from my past. And the partner isn't even at home. But when she comes home, she gets it because she's the target of blame. No other reason. She wasn't even home. Who put the milk up that way? I don't know. 4 people are in the house at the same time. You see? So it's like, oh, that's pretty ridiculous. Nevertheless, it certainly wears people down. Okay, now, the problem about this is you can't really approach people that have high conflict personalities and tell them that if it is developed and if they're in a kind of mania about it. When they're doing what they do, It's not the time to approach anyone about it. They'll see it as an attack. And sometimes, because these things are survival mechanisms that the high conflict person is doing, they'll see it actually as an attack on their needing to survive that way. And listen, you're just moving yourself right in the target of blame category, right? You've just moved yourself right into the, what do they call it? The target point, I guess I want to say. All right. They sometimes hold grudges for a very, very long time, too. So you don't want to do that. The whole point of the way I'm going to talk to you all today and the information I'm going to give you is trying to move you out of that target point. All right. Okay. Let's talk about these personalities that Eddie says, the 5 types, and then I'm going to talk about how to handle this, okay? All right, 5 types. The first is the narcissist. Now, everybody is narcissistic. As a matter of fact, Eddie talks about, I do disagree with him on this point, Eddie talks about there's a healthy narcissism that we all have. I don't call that narcissism. I do call that we are having a strong, powerful sense of self. I don't call that narcissism. I think narcissism is, people are experiencing that by degrees, but I think narcissism itself, the very nature of the word, is in the ego child's mind. Now I'm quibbling here over semantics. I hope you will understand that, but, I can only come from my point of view. Let's talk about narcissism and the narcissist. The narcissist has a worst fear. The worst fear is being disrespected and seen as inferior. That's the narcissist's worst fear. Now, what I want you to look for with a narcissist is a pattern of arrogance, insults, a feeling of entitlement, demanding admiration, yes, because they want people to see them as superior. And when people don't, they're going to insult them back. Remind you of anybody? All right. That's the narcissist. That's what to look for. The second type that Bill Eddy talks about is the borderline high conflict personality. Now, the narcissist you can be a narcissist, by the way, and not be high conflict. Do you understand that? We're talking about an element of these personality defenses that are over the top. The high conflict personality is more intense than the regular personality type we're talking about right now. So you've got a narcissist high conflict personality. That's what I just told you about. The next one is the borderline high conflict personality, and their worst fear is being abandoned. Their pattern to look for is mood swings. They'll love you one minute, hate you the next. Intensity, sudden anger, and their manipulations cause people to become angry with them and want to abandon them. Interesting. But I was talking to a friend of mine who had a borderline, real intense borderline roommate at one point. And this woman, you couldn't even say, I can't have dinner with you tonight because I'm going to the movies with so-and-so. They considered that abandonment, and she would attack based on something like that. So depending on what degree someone is a high conflict borderline, you may have a reaction over just telling them something about your schedule. So we have to wake up to what's going on. We have to be careful. We'll talk about how to negotiate around some of these points in just a minute if you have a high conflict person in your life. If you have a high conflict person in your life, it may be your boss, it may be your child, it may be your husband, it may be your wife. A lot of these things are not gender-based. At one point, they used to think that borderline was hello, good morning, hello, Dadis. They used to think that this was, a female trait, like the histrionic that we're going to talk about in a minute. The fact is, the latest statistics on histrionics is 51% of histrionics that are diagnosed are men, 49 women. Interesting. So we can't have those gender biases about this. We just have to accept each individual as they are and be aware. Again, be personality aware. Good. All right, so that's the borderline high conflict individual. Now let's talk about the antisocial high conflict person. Their worst fear is being dominated by others. Their pattern of dominating others emotionally, financially, physically, and by any other means necessarily causes people to want them locked up and dominated by authorities. You've got two types of antisocial high conflict personality. You've got the Ted Bundy type, and you've got the Bernie Madoff type. It might be the difference between a psychopath and a sociopath. I don't know, but they think so. They think a sociopath is formed by their environment, and a psychopath is formed not only by their environment, but a lot of other factors as well, hereditary factors, genetic factors, things like that. They haven't figured it out yet. They're still trying to figure it out. But if there is a difference between those two words, that's what they're thinking, the latest research. Okay. So that's the antisocial. The irony is that these people don't want to be dominated. Their worst fear is that, but they do dominate in some way. They don't seem to have any remorse for what they've done. It's all other people's faults. They are the victim. And they're often great mimics. I know that I just saw that program on Ted Bundy on the news, and I think it was Netflix it was running on, and I surely didn't want to watch that, but felt I needed to before this quarter because I was supposed to be teaching high conflict personalities, and it was so interesting. The most interesting part to me was this reporter interviewed him for about 3 days, 1, 2, 3, right? He wasn't getting anywhere. When he said, let's talk about your victims, let's talk about your crimes, Ted Bundy didn't want to talk about that. He wanted to talk about what a wonderful childhood he had and what a perfect little boy and how great his parents were and all the little things he did when he was young. And in a moment of divine inspiration, this reporter then went to him, the next interview, and said, let's not talk about you. I want you to give me an idea of the kind of person who would have done these crimes. And Bundy absolutely opened up and talked about his victims that way, but he could not, I want you to know, he could not, there's a synapse missing here in saying, I did this. He's talked about the kind of person that would do this. Now, in the film, they say, well, he's just smart legally. And that is true. I think there's something else as well. What? I don't know. but something else as well. He could not take responsibility for that and say, I did this way. And he was quite the psychologist. He knew all the words. They have found that some of these personality defenses, they say disorders, some of these things, are not helped by therapy. The paranoid personality that we'll talk about in just a minute is not helped by therapy very much because they don't trust the therapists. They don't trust them. And how can you get anywhere if you don't put your trust in somebody to help you and don't admire what they're saying, even if you don't believe it at first, right? The second type that doesn't tend to be helped with therapy is the antisocial personality. They like therapy because they learn the words. They learn how to play the system. They use it to mimic reality. But in terms of it actually helping them grow, change, and evolve, no. I think that's real interesting. All right, so that's the antisocial high conflict personality. The next one is the paranoid high conflict personality. Their worst fear is being betrayed by the people closest to them. I want you to look for their patterns: acting suspiciously, holding grudges and accusing people of being involved in conspiracies against them. This actually causes people to whisper about them and others, right? And to turn away and betray them after a buildup of frustration with them. Very sad. I think that you see on television a lot of films about the paranoid personality. It's the high conflict. I had a woman who worked with me for about 2 or 3 sessions before I passed her on because it took me a while, you know. She was lovely. She dressed well. She was beautifully spoken. And there was just the sweetest quality about her that I adored. And I wanted to help her, right? But it took me 2 or 3 times for her to realize that all of this that she was saying wasn't true. Her target of blame was her husband. She was the one that she was enormously suspicious about him. And it just took me a while to see, this is bigger than what I deal with. So I sent her on to a psychiatrist friend of mine, and I have always hoped that she was well, but I will hold in my heart forever, and she may not feel the same way, I don't know. You know, once someone gets away from you, you know, you can easily become a target of blame or something. But I'll never forget being honest with her. And I think she trusted me as much as she trusted anybody at that point. We sat out on my back stairs waiting for her husband to come and pick her up. And I just loved her so much, you know, because she was really trying to find her way out of this. And she listened about being paranoid and that she had to go on and get help for this. And for that moment, at least, and that's all I've got, we connected. And that meant a lot to me that she heard me in that moment. I always try to tell people the truth. And sometimes people can hear it, sometimes not so much. We have a caller, and then I want to go and talk about the histrionic personality, all right? But let's go to our caller first. This is a 929 exchange. Hello, I'm Martha Novak. Who are you? This is a 929 exchange. Hello? Anybody there? I don't know what happens here. Let's see. Let me try something here. No, that's not it. Well, if you would like to get on the air and talk to me, by all means, call me back. I would love to talk with you about whatever is on your mind. I always am looking forward to talking with you. Our call-in number, I forgot to announce it, so I'm going to announce it now, is 347-850-1647. Would love to hear from you. All right, let's talk about the fifth high conflict personality, according to Bill Eddy, and his book, 5 Types of People Who Could Ruin Your Life, which a little dramatic title there, but that's all right. Trying to sell books, I know, but the content's great. The fifth one I want to talk about and put on the table is the histrionic high conflict personality. Their worst fear is being ignored. Histrionic, by the way, if you don't know that word, means dramatic. All right? Means dramatic. We have a lot of people from other countries tuning into our show, so I want to make sure you all understand what I mean by histrionic. But there is an actual personality type in the DSM called the histrionic personality. This used to be called, years ago, the hysterical personality, right? The hysteria. I think we can thank Freud for that. And he was under the impression it was primarily women. But as I referred to earlier, the latest testing is 51% of the men in the world have it, 49% of the females tested. So there is just no gender correlation here. All right. So their worst fear is being ignored. The pattern is of endless dramatic intensity that honestly burns out people around them. And people wake up to soon honestly ignoring their stories and not believing a word they say. Kind of the boy that cried wolf syndrome, you know, where you just have to have something all the time. I have had friends in the past that have had highly developed forms of this, and they create drama constantly in their lives. They'll have fights with their sister over the care of their father. They'll demand, once the father dies, that they get this, that, or the other, and they create lawsuits. By the way, all of these patterns tend to be sometimes sue happy. They'll throw themselves into relationships with very ill, dying people, so it heightens their own drama. They are hypochondriacs, so they worry about their own health to the extreme when there isn't anything wrong with them, and more. Does this person that you know always have to have a big drama? And are they making more of it than there should be? You know, all of us might not feel good on a day. You might have a passing virus or something like that. But this is somebody that's going to fixate on something like that, and it's going to be the end of the world, and oh my God, you know, do they have cancer? No, they don't. Okay. So, Eddie, I want to go now to, what do you do with all this if you recognize somebody in your life like this? And by the way, you can have, remember the old show House of Cards? I want to put this on the table because it very much plays into this. There was an English version, House of Cards. Oh man, that show was just great. And we had our American version that starred Kevin Spacey. I'm not going to get into what any of these people did or did not do, but let's just talk about the show itself and the character that was created here. If I were you, I'd try to hunt down the English version and I'd watch the American version too, whatever you can find. The reason is the man, and I've forgotten his name now, and he's a very distinguished English actor that played the Frank Underwood part in the English version, played him as an antisocial personality disorder with a narcissistic wing. Real important for you to be able to see that what was first with him. And the antisocial personality, this cold, cruel man, was first, and then, and only then, the narcissism. Kevin Spacey, however, played it subtly differently. He played a narcissist with an antisocial personality disorder wing. And I think it's fascinating. I told my advanced class to watch this. It's very subtle, but if you'll watch it, trying to separate yourself from the actual story and watch it for how they are responding, you can actually see this very subtle difference in the way these characters are being portrayed. I found it fascinating. All right, now let's move back into what do you do with this? What do you do with this if you have to recognize these people? We're going to talk about next what to do to recognize these people, and then we're going to talk about how you interact with them now. How do you interact with them? If we can, before the end of the session today, and I don't think we're going to have time for this, so it might bleed into next week, we would like to talk about and I think this is really important that Bill Lally puts on the table 40 predictable behavioral patterns of the high conflict individual. That may be what next week is about, though. Okay. All right. Eddie recommends the Webb method for spotting high conflict individuals. The Webb method. He calls it personality awareness. I think it certainly is. This is about recognizing patterns of behavior. The Webb method, which he has trademarked, W-E-B. The W, E, and B stand for words, emotions, behaviors. Now let's talk about each of those things, because this is how you become aware of who you're talking to and if they are high conflict. Words. Watch out for words that grab your attention, he says. Especially a pattern of all or nothing language, like we talked about. You always, for example. You never, for example. It's my way or the highway. And sometimes they say that, and sometimes that's implied. Okay. It's all your fault. All or nothing thinking. Those are all his examples. I think they're very good. Keep in mind that we all say these things occasionally. I hope not too often, by the way. It's the pattern and intensity of frequently saying these things and writing these things that should grab your attention to spot a high conflict personality. Okay? Let's talk about emotions. Pay attention to how the person handles their emotions and how you feel around this person. We were talking in my class yesterday, and I thought this was real good. We were talking about how we all need to work on ourselves and get clear enough, and all of these people have worked on themselves and are now clear enough to go, I'm feeling something weird here. What am I feeling? Hello, Ellen. Oh, I'm so glad that you joined us today. Thank you so much for that comment, too. It's so important for you to get off all those old childhood things enough for you to have a strong Trust, good morning. A strong trust of yourself and your gut reactions, because they're really trying to tell you something. You see, the ego child's mind just tells us to be afraid in general. We can be carrying our mother's or father's fear. It doesn't even have anything to do with us. This is what consciousness work and energy work does. It clears out the old cobwebs, you see, so that we can say, wait a minute, there is something going on here. I need to pay attention to that, because our emotions in a case like this are a road sign saying, look more deeply. Find out what's really going on here. And it's, I remember that old, it was on this Ted Bundy show that, well, hello. Ellen is from Kokomo, Indiana. I absolutely love that name. Has cheered me up tremendously today. Kokomo. I like that a lot. Thank you. Hello from Atlanta, Georgia as well. In the Ted Bundy tapes, it was a fascinating thing, because how he oftentimes got people is he would bind his arm up or his leg. He'd pretend they were broken, right? He'd put a cast on, and he'd be carrying books or something, and he'd target someone, and he'd say, can you help take these books to the car? And there was always an urgency about it. I'm just having a terrible time, little old clumsy me. And they would go, and he'd say, would you mind putting them in the seat for me? And they'd lean over and put them in the seat. He'd shove them in, hit them over the head, shove them in, and, that's the beginning of that horrible story. I think all of us, I'm going to talk next week, certainly. All of us are vulnerable because we want to be nice. All of us want to believe the best in humanity, at the expense sometimes of these feelings that we're having that tell us, something's not quite right. We'll override those things. And this show is not about, in next show, not about you're being afraid of the world. This is about your waking up, you see? It's just about being awake to what is there and who you're talking to. Because there's communication and there's the art of communication. The art of communication is you actually knowing who you're talking to. Right? Thank you. So the web method. Emotions is what we're on right now. Does the person have a pattern of unmanaged emotions, such as rage, tears, rapid mood swings, emotional distractions, such as becoming defensive against a little criticism instead of getting their task done? Is there a preoccupation with past grievances, extremely loving someone they just met, suddenly hating someone that they used to love? Are there those things going on? Or are their emotions tightly controlled because they fear losing control? What's going on, right? And do they eventually lose control anyway? With dangerous consequences sometimes. And then what are your emotions around this person? Do you feel good? Are you afraid? Is something just not quite right? You need to move past that to see what you really feel. It may be say thank you, and that you've got something to do to move away. Let's talk about behaviors a minute. Does the other person's behavior shock you? Does something in their history stand out to you as abnormal? Do you find yourself searching for excuses to justify something extreme that they did? There is a marvelous rule that Bill Eddy puts on the table. It's called the 90% rule. This is his methodology, and I think it's a wonderful thing for you to keep in mind. Would 90% of the people in the world do that behavior? Would 90% of the people do that behavior. Now, you keep in mind, when I referred to this earlier, there is no normal. You hear people say that, but let me tell you, there is a range of normal, and that's 10%. All right, I mean, that's the 90%. 90% of the people are in this range of normal. So you need to ask yourself that 90% rule. Would 90% of the people in the world do what I just saw him do, say what I just saw that person say? Okay? Good. How's our time? 24 minutes. Good, good, good. All right. Let's talk about dealing with a high conflict person. Sometimes they're just in our lives. Sometimes we recognize them in our family. Sometimes we're working for them. Sometimes all sorts of things, right? It's extremely important to watch out for overdoing your responses to any person from the start of your relationship with them and while you're in relationship with them. Because if you overdo your responses, and I'm going to give you the specific overdos, this hooks you into this person, and this person is hooked into you, and they're not going to let you go so easily. It's going to be much harder to get away from them if you have played their game. So, what I want to say is this, and this is Eddie, and I think it's marvelous. Do not over-flatter a narcissist, high-conflict individual. Do not over-flatter. Just say what's true, right? One of his suggestions, which I think is a marvelous suggestion, is to learn to cultivate rather neutral responses. In other words, you hear a story, and instead of going, "Oh, you poor baby, look at what they've done to you," or any of the other responses that you could have, it's important to say, "Well, isn't that unusual? Well, I don't quite know what to say about that since I wasn't there, but wow. Oh, isn't that interesting? We had a good laugh yesterday. I'm going to give you my good laugh. My mother told a story about my grandmother who loved little babies, right? And a neighbor apparently had a child, and their child was in the stroller, and grandmother went over to admire the baby and looked in the stroller, and she said to my mother, I didn't ever hear the story directly from her, that it was really the ugliest baby she'd ever seen in her life. I don't know what qualified as ugly, right? But she said, "Oh my God, this was such an ugly baby." So the childhood story that came down, I mean the family story that came down is grandmother said, "My, that is a baby." So we were laughing in class yesterday for us to cultivate the "my, that is a baby" response that is rather neutral, that doesn't put you in one camp or the other, that lets them know that you heard them and that you have a basic respect, one human being to another, but you aren't necessarily playing into their what they need on this egoic and, more importantly, high conflict area. Okay, so don't over-flatter narcissists. Don't over-care, because that's the hook for borderlines. Don't over-help the antisocial high conflict person. For example, these lovely women that Ted Bundy played the victim for. Please help me. I've, broken my arm. I've broken my leg. Please help me to the car. May, we'll never know, but may have had something triggering in their mind. Now, here's the thing. We're all nice people. We all want to help. We all want to believe that everybody out there in humanity is nice and wonderful like we are. The truth is, everybody is in their degree of waking up, and some of these people, not so much. Part of what the discernment, part of this, these abilities in God are, that we all have because we're aspects of this wonderful God, is discernment. So if you are doing your Christian duty, above being discerning about everything, you're leaving out that part of God. I think this is what makes churches very vulnerable sometimes, because churches have this idea that, oh, we've just got to welcome everybody, and that's a lovely thought. I'm not criticizing, it's a lovely thought, but not knowing the what you're doing and being discerning in that is leaving out that element that's also God-given. You see, we can't be in la-la land about our lives. Good. All right. Over-engaging with stories of intrigue and danger with the paranoid, high conflict personality. Don't over-engage. Well, isn't that unusual? Wow, that's really interesting. No over-engagement. And over-attending to the dramatics of the histrionic personality. Don't do that. All right? Stay more neutral. Now, he has a very specific method. I'm wondering whether I'm going to have time for all of this. I hope so. He has a very specific methodology called the CARS method, C-A-R-S method of dealing with high conflict personalities. So let's go through the CARS method, and I'm going to kind of rush through so we can make sure we get through this part. Next week I'm going to do the 40 very predictable behaviors of high conflict personalities. And you know, I haven't said to you, but if you recognize yourself as one of these, for God's sake, don't do what people usually do, and that is defend this. Let's just go get help for it. Everything is movable, but the irony about movability is that you have to intend for things to be movable. You have to intend to change. Change takes time. Change takes growth. Change takes awareness of not only what you're doing, but what you could be doing that you're not doing yet, that might bring you a better result. So I urge you, if you recognize yourself, to get to work on you. Those of us that have done this for years say that, man, we can't imagine our lives without having gone on this journey. And it's never too late to start. I keep thinking of that wonderful saying, a Chinese saying, I think it is, a Chinese adage that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. Second best time is today. I like that a lot. Okay, CARS method the C stands for connecting with empathy, attention, and respect. I think this CARS method actually is marvelous for everybody. Connect with empathy, attention, and respect. Hear what they're saying to you. Respect them as another human being. They may be attacking you, but if you attack back, my dear, you're playing their game. Histrionics are going to like you to get angry back. That's what they like, drama. Do you want to expend your energy that way? It's kind of a waste of energy, you see? So simply listen, connect, repeat back some of their words, and connect with empathy, attention, and respect. The second thing, analyze options and or alternatives. And what I mean by that, if you had when I was sitting there with my paranoid friend, my job was to hear what she had to say and to certainly empathize and say, I can't even imagine how you must feel if something like that happened to me. If I had these thoughts, I might feel the same way. I don't know. Have you thought about this? It could be this. It could be that. It doesn't necessarily mean that your husband is having an affair. It could mean that he's worried about you, that he's staying at work more often because he doesn't know what to do here. He doesn't have a dialogue with you yet. So if you are, now a lot of times when you're recognizing some of these people, you don't have to interact with them. You can just meet them at at the hairdressers and recognize some of these characteristics, and you never see these people again. But sometimes they're in your life. Sometimes they're the boss. Sometimes they're the this. Sometimes they're the that. So it's important to know how to respond. That's what we're talking about right now. So that's the, have you thought of other options here? Number 3 is the R part of this, is responding to hostility or misinformation. There are 2 points I want to make here. One is you don't want to be a target for very long. You want to move yourself out of target range. I remember with this woman in my class, I've known her now for 18, 19 years. She's been a client of mine for that long. And she was the one that had the kind of wacky, totally borderline roommate at one time. And her roommate said really terrible things about her when they broke up, and it was dreadful. Posted a lot of misinformation online and that kind of thing. And my advice to my friend, and I still think it was right, she does too, was to not respond. You don't exist. She's going to find another target of blame, so disappear. I often give clients this advice if I see that this is not a relationship to sustain. Just disappear. Now, she kept sending her emails and phone calls that baited my client, and they were grossly untrue, out-and-out lies. And ordinarily, my client would have said, "That's not true." I said, disappear. Disappear. Don't answer those things. In a marriage, you can't do that unless you've decided to divorce. So that's a very important time where you say, well, I'm sorry you feel that way. You are misreading me. And when you calm down and want to talk about this, I'll tell you what's really going on with me and what my intention really was. That's what I mean by responding to hostility and misinformation. When someone is yelling and screaming and carrying on, you don't have to participate in that. You can say, well, when you calm down, we'll talk. I can't talk when you're like this. And you can't talk to me when you're this hot and when we're both trying to make our points. So calm down, and we'll absolutely talk about this, and we'll address this thing. And we both got misinformation on each other's parts. Why don't we correct that? And the fourth method, again, all of these things go together, is when you are interacting with someone like this, you have to set limits on high conflict behavior. Set limits. In other words, if someone is just completely berating you, do you have to stand there and listen to it? No. I would say, okay, I think I'm getting what your point is. You're missing mine. So here's what we're going to do. Let's separate for a while. Let's you go to your room. I'll go to my room. Let's create some distance here. Let's get over this initial high conflict reaction, and then we'll talk. I can talk to you today, later on, or I can talk to you tomorrow when I have more time. These are ways to set limits. Guys, I'm going to stop right there because our time is almost out. We'll talk about the predictable behaviors of high conflict people next week. I hope you've enjoyed today's show. Thank you so much for listening. We're here every Sunday at 10 o'clock in the morning. Daylight savings time. Today was daylight savings time change. And we hope that you will continue to join us. Love to hear from you. My website is Martha Novak, MarthaNovak.com, and you can check out our offerings there. Also, you can write me through that website, and I'd love to hear from you for suggestions on the show or if you have any comments or questions. All right? Thank you so much for listening. I'm going to pray when we get off the air because we're running out of time. Take care of yourself now. Bye-bye.